What would you do if the entire class laughed at your dream and even your teacher didn't believe you? But what if the person you were accused of lying about suddenly appeared? Those who mocked you will face a bitter ending. On a bright Monday morning, golden sunlight streamed through the large glass windows of Class 4B at Maplewood Elementary School. The rays danced on the glossy wooden desks, reflecting off the colorful paintings that covered the walls. The classroom buzzed with cheerful chatter as stories of the weekend were exchanged nonstop. Amidst the lively sounds, Jaden sat quietly in the back row, his hands gripping the hem of his blue school uniform. The 10-year-old boy, with his bright brown skin and naturally curly hair, carefully brushed by his mother that morning. Jaden's large, round eyes quickly scanned the faces around him, rosy, fair faces, eagerly sharing stories about picnics, new toys, or fun birthday parties. Ms. Parker, the homeroom teacher of Class 4B, with her blonde hair neatly tied at the nape of her neck and a thin smile like a pencil line, stepped into the classroom. Her voice was gentle but cold. "Class, this week we'll start with an exciting topic, your parents' jobs." The classroom became even more lively. Hands shot up in the air and voices called out, "Miss! Miss!" from all directions. "Emily, what does your father do?" Miss Parker asked, pointing at a blonde girl sitting in the front row. "My dad is a lawyer, miss," Emily replied proudly. "Wonderful," Miss Parker nodded, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "And Mark?" "My dad is a surgeon, miss." "Oh, a noble profession." Jaden sat silently, listening to every word, every laugh of his classmates. His hands clenched tighter, but a quiet flame burned inside him. He also wanted to speak. He wanted to talk about his father. Suddenly, Ms. Parker's gaze landed on him. "And Jaden, what does your father do?" The atmosphere seemed to shift. A few students turned to look at him. A brief hesitation, but then Jaden raised his head, his eyes shining with pride. "My dad works at NASA, miss." A moment of silence, a brief but heavy pause, as if time had suddenly frozen. Then laughter erupted everywhere. The first giggles quickly spread like wildfire over dry grass. "NASA? Really?" A boy named Dylan laughed, covering his mouth as if he had just heard a joke. "Hey, are you talking about NASA? The place with astronauts and rockets?" A red-haired girl shouted, laughing until she had tears in her eyes. "Come on, Jaden! Tell the truth," another voice echoed. Jaden felt his face heat up. His hands gripped the edges of his chair, and his pride felt trampled. But what hurt Jaden the most wasn't the laughter of his classmates. It was the look in Ms. Parker's eyes. A gaze filled with doubt, and on the corner of her mouth, a thin, cold smile. "Such a vivid imagination, Jaden," she said, her tone seemingly praising, but laced with sarcasm. "But we're talking about real jobs, kids." A vivid imagination? That wasn't imagination. It was the truth. Jaden's father really worked at NASA. Every night before bed, he would hear his father talk about space projects, distant planets, and the test flights he participated in. Jaden felt his throat tighten. He wanted to speak. He wanted to say that his father really worked at NASA, that he was an aerospace engineer, that he wasn't lying. But the laughter, the disdainful looks of his classmates, and especially Ms. Parker's mocking smile, were like an invisible wall standing in front of him. He could only lower his head, his eyes beginning to sting. The kids around him kept laughing, kept teasing, calling him liar, NASA boy, and Ms. Parker just stood there, arms crossed, as if she were enjoying a dull comedy. Finally, the bell rang, signaling recess. The kids burst out of the classroom like a flood, leaving Jaden sitting there, alone among the empty chairs. His hands still gripped the hem of his shirt. His heart raced, torn between anger and sadness. Somewhere far above, beyond the clouds, where the stars sparkled in the vast space, Jaden's father was working, a truth that no one here believed. And all Jaden had left was silence, a heavy, choking silence. After that fateful day in class, Jaden became a silent shadow. The children who used to greet him every morning now turned away, avoiding his gaze. During recess, he often stood alone by the trees at the far end of the schoolyard, watching other kids play together. Laughter echoed across the yard, but none of it was meant for him. NASA boy! Liar! Occasionally, some kids would pretend to be astronauts, running around with their arms outstretched, making rocket noises. I'm Jaden's dad, flying to the moon. Each taunt felt like a dagger cutting into Jaden's pride. He knew he wasn't lying. His father really worked at NASA, but the truth had become a curse, a burden he carried alone. Inside the classroom, things were no better. Ms. Parker, who used to encourage all her students, now regarded Jaden with a cold, indifferent gaze. Whenever he raised his hand to answer, she would look past him as if he were invisible. Anyone else want to answer this question? She would say, ignoring his small, hopeful hand. If another student made a mistake on an assignment, she would gently explain the correct answer. But when Jaden submitted his work, she would glance at it briefly and mark it with red ink. Be more careful, Jaden. Even when he asked to go out for water, she would reply with a mocking tone, "Oh, are you going to contact NASA?" The class would erupt in laughter, while Jaden bowed his head, trying to hide the tears welling in his eyes. Every day at school became a nightmare. Jaden no longer dared to look anyone in the eye. His steps became heavy, and his heart ached at the thought of another school day. At home, Jaden grew quieter. His mother would ask, "How was school today, sweetheart?" "It was fine," Jaden would answer, forcing a smile. But his parents noticed something was wrong. His father often came home late from work, but whenever he was home, he would tell Jaden stories about space, about the research missions he and his team were working on. "Did you know, Jaden? NASA is developing a new spacecraft that can travel even farther than Mars." Jaden would nod, but his eyes no longer sparkled as they once did. In the evening, in his small room, Jaden sat silently by his desk. The drawings of spaceships he once loved, which he had drawn himself, now seemed dull. The model space probe that his father had built with him last year sat lifeless on the shelf, a thin layer of dust gathering on its surface. He missed those nights when his father would sit beside him, telling stories about stars, explaining how rockets launched into space, and sharing humanity's dream of exploring the universe. But now those memories only made Jaden's heart feel heavier. "What did I do wrong?" he whispered to himself in the darkness. "Why doesn't anyone believe me?" He didn't want to lie. His father really worked at NASA, but the truth had become a curse, a burden he carried alone. Night after night, Jaden curled up under his blanket, trying to keep warm as tears soaked his pillow. One evening during dinner, his mother looked at him with concern. "Jaden, what's wrong? You're not as cheerful as before. Did something happen at school?" "Nothing, Mom. I'm just tired." His father frowned but tried to speak gently. "Son, if something's bothering you, you can always tell us." Jaden looked down, focusing on his food without saying another word. After dinner, his parents sat together in the living room, exchanging worried glances. "I feel like something has happened at school," his mother whispered, her voice trembling. "I think so too," his father sighed. "Tomorrow, I'll try to talk to Miss Parker and see how things are in class." Jaden overheard their conversation from his room, but he didn't feel relieved. He feared that if his parents found out, everything would only get worse. He wanted his parents to be proud of him, not worried. But the more he tried to bear it alone, the lonelier he felt. That night, Jaden lay curled up in his blanket, his heart aching. Where was the way out of this loneliness? Jaden thought that being isolated was the worst thing that could happen, but he was wrong. The silence he endured in the classroom was only the beginning. The teasing words gradually turned into actions. "Hey, NASA boy, flown to the sky yet? Have you seen your dad riding a rocket to school?" The kids no longer just mocked him with words. They started snatching Jaden's backpack, throwing his books to the ground. Once, as Jaden was retrieving his books from his locker, someone from the group pushed him hard from behind. He fell onto the cold, tiled floor, his books scattered everywhere. They laughed gleefully, while Jaden quietly picked them up, his hands trembling. He wanted to fight back, to stand up for himself, but every time he tried to speak, Miss Parker's mocking voice echoed in his head. "Come on, Jaden, stop telling stories." He felt like a liar in everyone's eyes, even when he was telling the truth. And so Jaden chose to remain silent. Everything escalated on a Friday afternoon. It was drizzling lightly, and the students were allowed inside the classroom earlier than usual. Jaden sat quietly at his desk, trying to finish his math homework while laughter echoed around him. Suddenly, a group of kids approached him. Leading them was Ethan, the most popular boy in class, with his curly blonde hair and bright, sparkling eyes. "Hey, NASA boy," Ethan called out loudly, drawing the attention of the whole class. Jaden tried to ignore him, keeping his head down and focusing on his work. "Are you calculating the trajectory to the moon?" Another kid laughed. Ethan glanced over Jaden's shoulder and then turned back to his friends. "You know, I think he needs some NASA technology to make it look more real." Before Jaden could understand what was happening, a cold, sticky liquid poured over his head. It wasn't water. It was thick and clung to his curly black hair. Glue, super glue. "Oh no! Don't tell me that's an astronaut's wig," Ethan shouted, and the whole group burst into laughter. Jaden froze. He reached up to touch his head, feeling the thick layer of glue quickly hardening, sticking to his curls. He couldn't pull it out. The entire class laughed. Some even secretly recorded it on their phones. Jaden stood up, tears welling up in his eyes, but he didn't cry. Not in front of them. He ran out of the classroom, straight to the restroom. Standing in front of the mirror, he saw his reflection. His once neatly combed curls now matted, tangled, and covered in glue. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he desperately tried to pull the glue out, but each tug felt like tearing his scalp. Jaden knew what he had to do. He rushed to the teacher's lounge where Ms. Parker was chatting with some other teachers. "Ms. Parker!" Jaden called, his voice choked with emotion. Ms. Parker turned, a slight look of annoyance crossing her face. "Jaden? What is it now?" Jaden pointed at his hair, the glue sticking to his black curls. They poured glue on my hair." Ms. Parker glanced at him for a second, then sighed. "Jaden, stop making a big deal out of everything. You always want to be the center of attention, don't you?" But this is real glue. My head hurts." "It's just a prank, Jaden. You need to learn to take a joke," she replied, her eyes passing over him like he was just an inconvenience. Jaden stood there stunned. It felt like the ground beneath him was falling away. "Go back to class, and next time, try not to be an easy target for jokes," Mrs. Parker said, turning away. The door closed, leaving Jaden standing alone in the empty hallway. The pain on his scalp was nothing compared to the ache in his heart. That afternoon, Jaden returned home, trying to hide his hair under a cap, but his parents noticed immediately. "Jaden, what happened?" his mother asked worriedly, moving closer to him. Jaden didn't answer. He just stood there, his eyes red. His father approached, gently removing the cap from his head, and immediately froze. "Who did this?" his father asked, his voice deep but filled with anger. Jaden's voice broke as he recounted everything. The mocking, the isolation, the glue poured on his hair, and Miss Parker's indifference. His mother pulled him into a tight hug, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We can't let this continue," his father said, his voice sharp and resolute. "Tomorrow we're going to talk to the school, and if they don't handle it, I'll make sure it gets sorted out." Jaden looked up at his father, seeing in his eyes a fierce determination, a burning protectiveness. And for the first time in many days, he didn't feel alone. Jaden thought that being isolated was the worst thing that could happen, but he was wrong. The silence he endured in the classroom was only the beginning. The teasing words gradually turned into actions. "Hey, NASA boy, flown to the sky yet? Have you seen your dad riding a rocket to school?" The kids no longer just mocked him with words. They started snatching Jaden's backpack, throwing his books to the ground. Once, as Jaden was retrieving his books from his locker, someone from the group pushed him hard from behind. He fell onto the cold, tiled floor, his books scattered everywhere. They laughed gleefully, while Jaden quietly picked them up, his hands trembling. He wanted to fight back, to stand up for himself, but every time he tried to speak, Miss Parker's mocking voice echoed in his head. "Come on, Jaden, stop telling stories." He felt like a liar in everyone's eyes, even when he was telling the truth. And so, Jaden chose to remain silent. Everything escalated on a Friday afternoon. It was drizzling lightly, and the students were allowed inside the classroom earlier than usual. Jaden sat quietly at his desk, trying to finish his math homework while laughter echoed around him. Suddenly, a group of kids approached him. Leading them was Ethan, the most popular boy in class, with his curly blonde hair and bright sparkling eyes. "Hey, NASA boy," Ethan called out loudly, drawing the attention of the whole class. Jaden tried to ignore him, keeping his head down and focusing on his work. "Are you calculating the trajectory to the moon?" Another kid laughed. Ethan glanced over Jaden's shoulder and then turned back to his friends. "You know, I think he needs some NASA technology to make it look more real." Before Jaden could understand what was happening, a cold, sticky liquid poured over his head. It wasn't water, it was thick and clung to his curly black hair. Glue. Super glue. "Oh no! Don't tell me that's an astronaut's wig!" Ethan shouted, and the whole group burst into laughter. Jaden froze. He reached up to touch his head, feeling the thick layer of glue quickly hardening, sticking to his curls. He couldn't pull it out. The entire class laughed. Some even secretly recorded it on their phones. Jaden stood up, tears welling up in his eyes, but he didn't cry. Not in front of them. He ran out of the classroom, straight to the restroom. Standing in front of the mirror, he saw his reflection. His once neatly combed curls now matted, tangled, and covered in glue. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he desperately tried to pull the glue out, but each tug felt like tearing his scalp. Jaden knew what he had to do. He rushed to the teacher's lounge, where Miss Parker was chatting with some other teachers. "Miss Parker," Jaden called, his voice choked with emotion. Miss Parker turned, a slight look of annoyance crossing her face. "Jaden, what is it now?" Jaden pointed at his hair, the glue sticking to his black curls. They poured glue on my hair." Miss Parker glanced at him for a second, then sighed. "Jaden, stop making a big deal out of everything. You always want to be the center of attention, don't you?" But this is real glue. My head hurts." "It's just a prank, Jaden. You need to learn to take a joke," she replied, her eyes passing over him like he was just an inconvenience. Jaden stood there stunned. It felt like the ground beneath him was falling away. "Go back to class, and next time, try not to be an easy target for jokes," Miss Parker said, turning away. The door closed, leaving Jaden standing alone in the empty hallway. The pain on his scalp was nothing compared to the ache in his heart. That afternoon, Jaden returned home, trying to hide his hair under a cap, but his parents noticed immediately. "Jaden, what happened?" his mother asked worriedly, moving closer to him. Jaden didn't answer. He just stood there, his eyes red. His father approached, gently removing the cap from his head, and immediately froze. "Who did this?" his father asked, his voice deep but filled with anger. Jaden's voice broke as he recounted everything. The mocking, the isolation, the glue poured on his hair, and Ms. Parker's indifference. His mother pulled him into a tight hug, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We can't let this continue," his father said, his voice sharp and resolute. "Tomorrow we're going to talk to the school, and if they don't handle it, I'll make sure it gets sorted out." Jaden looked up at his father, seeing in his eyes a fierce determination, a burning protectiveness. And for the first time in many days, he didn't feel alone. Miss Parker sat alone in her small apartment, the dim light casting a pale glow on her weary face. The room was so quiet she could hear the ticking of the clock with each passing second. On the table, her laptop remained open, flooded with dozens of emails from the school administration and other teachers. Most of them demanding explanations, but some expressing disappointment, even outright criticism. Her phone screen constantly lit up with notifications from social media. Angry comments, critical messages, and even missed calls from unknown numbers. Her reputation had been tarnished across the school and in parent groups. "How did things turn out like this?" she whispered, her trembling hand gripping a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. Memories replayed in her mind like a horror film, her mocking smile at Jaden, the helpless look in his eyes, the laughter of the students, and that moment when glue poured over Jaden's curly black hair. She couldn't deny it any longer. She was wrong, not just wrong in her actions, but wrong from the very way she thought. But why? Why had she reacted that way to Jaden? A strange unease rose in her chest, a mix of shame and fear. That night, Ms. Parker couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, the faint light from the bedside lamp reflecting off the ceiling. Memories of her childhood surfaced one by one. Growing up in a small town where differences were always met with scrutiny, she had learned to fit in by trying to conform. She had always tried to keep everything in order, believing that was the only way to maintain discipline and success. But that mindset had made her rigid and biased. When Jaden said his father worked at NASA, she had immediately doubted him, not because she thought he was lying, but because in her mind, big dreams like that were not meant for kids like Jaden, a quiet, different child with dark skin. "I've become the kind of person I once hated," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. The next morning, still in the dim light of her room, Ms. Parker decided to do something she never thought she would. She picked up her phone and dialed the school office. "Hello, this is Ms. Parker. I would like to request a meeting with Jaden's family to personally apologize." Principal Johnson was surprised. "Are you sure? Given your current situation, I think it would be best if you waited until things calm down." "No, I need to do this. I was wrong, and I have to face the consequences." Principal Johnson paused for a moment, then sighed. "I will make the arrangements." That afternoon, Jaden's family agreed to meet Ms. Parker in the principal's office. No longer the cold, distant teacher with a thin, mocking smile, Ms. Parker arrived looking exhausted, her hair hastily tied and her eyes filled with remorse. Jaden sat between his parents, his eyes fixed on the table, unwilling to look at her. His father sat upright, his gaze sharp but silent. His mother's eyes were red, but she remained resolute. "Ms. Parker," Principal Johnson began, "you said you wanted to apologize to Jaden's family." Ms. Parker took a deep breath, her voice trembling. I want to say that I am truly sorry, not just because I failed to protect Jaden, but because I hurt him. I didn't just fail as a teacher, I failed as a human being." She bowed her head. "Jaden, I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I hope you understand that I'm trying to change. I was wrong for not believing you, for not standing by you, and I want to make things right." Silence filled the room. Jaden looked up, his eyes a mixture of anger and pain. "You never asked me the truth. You just assumed I was lying, because I was me." Those words cut Ms. Parker like a knife. "I thought that if I stayed quiet, if I did everything right, people would accept me. But they didn't." Jaden's father spoke, his voice slow but powerful. "An apology cannot erase what you did, but it can be the first step. We don't need empty words. We need to see change." Ms. Parker nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I will change, I promise." The next day, Ms. Parker submitted her resignation, but Principal Johnson didn't immediately accept it. "I don't think you should give up, Parker. If you truly want to make amends, you have to prove it. Stay and do the right thing." And so, Ms. Parker was assigned to a retraining program on inclusive education, learning how to recognize and eliminate personal biases in teaching. She also volunteered to lead workshops for students on bullying and respecting differences. In these sessions, she wasn't just a guide, she was also a learner. She listened to students' stories, stories of those she had once hurt, and stories from teachers who fought for them. She learned to see diversity as a strength, not something to be controlled. One afternoon, as she was tidying up after a workshop, Ms. Parker saw Jaden standing by the door. "Ms. Parker," Jaden said, his voice soft but steady, "I heard you're taking the training program. I think anyone can change." Ms. Parker's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of hope. "Thank you, Jaden." And it wasn't just a thank you for his forgiveness, it was a thank you for helping her realize that change always begins with sincerity. After all the turmoil, Jaden returned to school with a completely different mindset. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like he was invisible. The disdainful glances and mocking whispers had disappeared, replaced with looks of respect, and sometimes remorse. Dressed in his clean uniform, his backpack with a solar system print swung lightly on his shoulder. The NASA t-shirt he once wore with fear of ridicule had now become a badge of pride. When he stepped into the classroom, there were no more sneers or condescending looks. Instead, his classmates lowered their gazes, and a few even offered him small, apologetic smiles. David, his only friend who had stood by him during the tough times, greeted him with a cheerful high five. Hey, guess what? Today we're learning about the planets. You're going to be the expert again. David laughed. Jaden smiled back, but this time it was a genuine smile. Ms. Parker had changed as well. In her classes, she was no longer the cold, strict teacher she used to be. Instead, she actively encouraged all students to share their thoughts, always making sure to acknowledge Jaden. One time during a science lesson, when Jaden raised his hand to talk about Mars and NASA's plans to send humans there, Ms. Parker not only listened but smiled encouragingly. Thank you, Jaden. Your knowledge is truly valuable. In fact, let's dedicate today's class to hear more about what you know. The class clapped, not mockingly, but in genuine admiration. Outside of class, Jaden spent more time in the library, immersing himself in books about space and the universe. These pages opened a world far bigger than any classroom. He began recording his discoveries in a small notebook, drawing star maps, designing spacecraft, and even drafting his own plans for a moon exploration mission. Every time he completed a new page, he would eagerly show it to his father. "Dad, look at this. This is my version of the Artemis spacecraft that NASA is developing. I made some adjustments to save fuel." His father would always smile, gently ruffling his hair. "My son is becoming a real scientist." On quiet nights, father and son would sit on the porch staring at the starry sky. His father would point out constellations, share stories of astronauts, and talk about the missions he had participated in. "You know, Jaden, not everyone can see the potential in others from the start, but the most important thing is that you always know who you are and what you can achieve." "Yes, Dad. One day I want people to know me the way they know you." Jaden didn't keep his passion to himself. With the help of Mr. Chen, the enthusiastic science teacher, Jaden founded an astronomy club at school. Each week, he and his club members discussed topics like black holes, meteor showers, and how rockets worked. Gradually, his club attracted not only science enthusiasts, but even some of the students who had once bullied him. One day, Colin, one of the kids who used to mock Jaden, shyly approached the club. Jaden didn't hesitate for a second, smiling warmly. "Want to join? Today we're talking about NASA's Artemis mission." Colin hesitated but eventually nodded. From then on, a new friendship formed between Jaden and Colin, one not built on ridicule but on respect and understanding. Jaden's achievements in the science club soon gained recognition throughout the school. At the end of the year, the school organized a science fair, and Jaden was chosen to represent his class. Together with David, he designed a rocket model that could launch using accurately calculated thrust. On the day of the competition, surrounded by hundreds of students from other schools, Jaden stood tall, his eyes shining with excitement. When his rocket soared into the sky, the crowd burst into applause. Jaden won first prize. But more important than the award was the recognition, not just from his friends and teachers, but from himself. On the bus ride home, Jaden leaned his head against the window, watching the rows of trees whiz by. "One day I will go up there. I will explore the stars. I will be the one to open new horizons." Those whispered words were like a promise to himself, and from being a boy who was once bullied, who struggled to be heard, Jaden became a beacon of hope, not only for himself but for others. His classmates no longer knew him just as NASA boy, but as a young scientist with a passionate heart and an unyielding spirit. The Springfield School Science Fair took place on a bright, clear morning, with sunlight streaming through the trees, casting shimmering rays on the school grounds. Rows of chairs were neatly arranged in front of a large stage. Above it, a banner proudly displayed the words, "Honoring Young Talents, Exploring Science and Innovation." Jaden sat in the front row, surrounded by the excited chatter of his friends and the proud, beaming faces of his teachers. He wore his favorite NASA t-shirt, but this time, it wasn't a shield for protection. It was a badge of honor. "Hey, are you nervous?" David whispered, giving Jaden a playful nudge. "A little," Jaden admitted, but the joy inside him was like a wave, rising higher with each second. On stage, Miss Parker, now transformed into a warm and dedicated teacher, stepped up to the microphone, beginning her speech. "Today, we are here to honor the students who have excelled in science and innovation, but most importantly, we are here to tell a story of courage, resilience, and a boundless passion for science. The crowd fell silent. Jaden realized that all eyes were on him. Ms. Parker continued, "Jaden, you have taught us all a valuable lesson about never giving up on your truth. Even when others mock or doubt you, you have shown us that dreams have no color, no limits, and no barriers of prejudice." Applause began, slow at first, then growing into a loud, thunderous cheer. And today we are honored to welcome a special guest, someone who has inspired Jaden, someone who is not only a scientist, but also a wonderful father. Jaden's eyes widened, his heart pounding. Then from the side of the stage, his father appeared. He wore a white astronaut suit with the NASA logo proudly displayed on his chest, and the American and Jamaican flags embroidered on his sleeve. Each step he took radiated pride and strength. "Dad," Jaden whispered, his voice choked with emotion. His father stood on stage looking down at his son with a gentle smile, then turned to face the crowd. "I am an astronaut with NASA, but the title I am most proud of is being Jaden's father." The entire audience fell silent, the breeze rustling softly through the leaves. "Jaden has always asked me about the stars, about the mysteries of the universe. But perhaps it is Jaden who has taught me the most about courage, about standing up for the truth, even when no one else believes you. I watched as my son was mocked, bullied, but he never gave up. He turned those hurtful words into motivation. He did not allow others' ignorance to define his worth." Tears streamed down Jaden's cheeks. He wasn't alone. Many in the audience were also wiping away tears. Today, I want to tell all of you students here, always pursue your passion, always stand strong, no matter how fierce the storm, and always remember, the truth will prevail. Jaden's father stepped off the stage and walked towards him. He knelt down, gently placing his hand on Jaden's shoulder. "Are you proud of me, son?" he asked, his eyes full of love. "I've always been proud of you, Dad," Jaden replied, wrapping his arms tightly around his father. The entire schoolyard erupted in thunderous applause, not just for Jaden, but for both father and son. David, Jaden's best friend, stood up, cheering loudly. "Jaden! Jaden! Jaden!" Soon the entire crowd joined in, chanting his name. After the ceremony, Springfield School hung a large photograph in the main hall. It was a picture of Jaden and his father, the astronaut father proudly standing beside his son, who shone with pride and confidence. Beneath the photo was a caption, "Always look up to the sky, for that is where our dreams begin." It wasn't just Jaden who had changed. Springfield School had transformed too. Students no longer mocked each other for being different. Teachers no longer held narrow-minded prejudices. Science clubs flourished. Mr. Chen organized more science workshops, even inviting NASA experts to speak to the students. And Jaden, from a boy who was once bullied, became a symbol of courage, of limitless passion for science, and of unwavering determination to stand by the truth. That night, Jaden and his father sat together on the balcony, gazing at the starry sky. "Dad, one day I'll go up there. I'll explore the stars. I'll discover things no one else has ever seen." "I know you will, son. I believe in you," his father smiled, gently ruffling his hair. "And I will always be proud of you." The vast sky stretched endlessly above, but for Jaden, it was no longer an unreachable distance. It was a place where his dreams awaited.